Welcome, welcome, everyone. We are here with one of our favorite spiritual authors and channels, Paul Selig, who is joining us from Maui. Lucky you. And before we get started, we'd like to just give a brief overview of Paul's background for those of you who are new to his work. Paul is a spiritual channel and an author of 10 books. His first is probably the most well-known, I Am the Word. And he's done and known for his trilogy sets of books. Realization, Alchemy, and the Kingdom is one. And then, of course, the Master Trilogy series of books. Paul has a master's degree from Yale and a spiritual experience in 1987, which is kind of when we graduated, so that shows everyone how old we all are. Left him clairvoyant, and then later began to hear, in quotes, for his clients. Described as the medium for the living, which I love, Paul has the unique ability to step into and become the people his clients ask about, often taking on their personalities and physical characteristics as he hears them telepathically. And you also served on the NYU faculty for about 25 years teaching writing, right?
I did.
And a great writer you are, as are the guides.
Well, actually, I'm not the writer. I don't write the books. I just take dictation. The books are the transcriptions. I write an introduction sometimes, but that's the end of my contribution, other than interrupting the channeling when it gets too confusing or too challenging for me.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, it's something that makes, I think, reading your books humorous and also inviting, right? Very approachable for the reader, because sometimes in the middle of the book, it'll say, Paul's interrupting, or, let's get clarity about something. So I think that's really useful for the reader.
Hope so.
Well, so let's start. My first question is, I had a session with you, must have been 7 or 8 years ago, in your New York City studio. And the session was great because you made me laugh through the whole thing, because you were taking on the personality of Anthony, who you hadn't met. And I was cracking up through the whole thing because you were so spot on. Do you want to explain to people what that process is like for people who might be new to your work?
Well, I tend to think of myself sort of as a radio. And when I'm channeling and working with my guides and taking dictation, or they're teaching a class through me, that's what I'm hearing. And my job is to take the dictation and render it cleanly. And there's no interpretation involved. So my opinions are my opinions, but they don't get to factor into this unless I want to interrupt and say, what is this about, or why are you saying this? When I read for people, that's psychic work, which is a little bit different. So if you think of me as a switchboard, when I'm working with my guides, I'm plugged into them, into that radio station. And if I'm reading you, I'm tuned into you. And so you're what I tune into. And if you have somebody in your life that you want to get some clarity about a relationship with, be it a boss or a partner or a kid, I can go to them through you. So in some ways, I'm just tuning my radio to play your broadcasts. And you can hear people at different levels. The first thing that I'll often get is the personality self, who has an agenda or has a gripe or is upset about something or is hungry for something. And then I can usually go to the same person at a higher level and sort of access what the larger arc might be, or what the opportunity is, or what the challenge is, and how to meet the challenge. So that's more psychic reading. I don't really talk to dead people. I mean, my guides are out of body, but it's a different level of vibration. And people that still have a body are generally pretty easy for me to get. So that's what I do. It's clairsentience and clairaudience are the primary skill sets that I utilize.
It's fascinating, actually, because most mediums, right, they're tapping into the field of the so-called deceased, because we never really die, we just transition. But, it's interesting that you find it easier to tap into the living.
It's not that it's easier, it's just how I'm wired. If you ask about your grandma who's on the other side, and I'll get her, but I'll get her as she was. And, I'll hear, and that's useful if somebody's trying to work out some unfinished stuff. If she comes through from the other side, it happens on occasion, but I don't call myself a spiritual medium because that's really not my work. They call me a medium for the living because it's something that I have an ability to do. I think it's an odd skill set, but I'm not trained in this. I suppose if I wanted to go study, I might, have an easier time with the folks on the other side, but that's not really what my work is. My primary work is as a channel. And because the work with the living is provable, I've been filmed doing this and sort of taking on the physical characteristics of people who have severe disabilities and, or unique expressive acts that I can take on. And I like the fact that that can be proven because it helps me, and I think it helps other people sort of trust the teaching that's coming through me, which is actually coming at a much higher level and is really operating beyond personality and beyond sort of the needs of the personality to figure it all out and get their way.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, obviously in the classic sense, it's called evidential mediumship, but you're doing it for the living. And I think it does validate, right, the credibility of what's coming through.
Could you speak a little bit you speak about your guides.
Yeah.
Who are they exactly?
They're teachers. I mean, the name that they've used, they've described themselves a different way. They've said, we are who you become when you know who you are. They've called themselves the true self, which is another way of saying the Christ or the monad in manifestation. But the name that they generally use is the name 𝐿𝐾𝐨𝐧'𝐭, which is an old name. And they say, if you wish to call us something, you may call us 𝐿𝐾𝐨𝐴. And I understand that as a priesthood, but they come through as a collective. There's one guide that I've seen that shows up, clairvoyantly in a visual sense, and not often. And I'm always surprised when it happens, but he always looks the same. And I'm grateful for that. He's got a great big hat with some kind of, flat thing on the top and a long, long beard and the bluest eyes I've ever seen. And, I'm told, because I mean, it's actually been filmed, but when I'm channeling and they really step in fully, my eyes go very, very blue as well. And I have hazel eyes. So I think that's interesting. And I found that comforting. But when I saw him, I recognized him. I knew who he was. And it's an amazing presence to feel.
Do you think that that's actually the Melchizedek energy when you...
Yeah, I do, but I don't know how much it matters. And one of the problems I have with sort of New Age spirituality is it's become very caught up in getting. So, when I first started opening up psychically, when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, you'd hear things, and I lived in Manhattan then, you'd hear things like, wow, there's an Archangel Michael channeling on the Upper West Side, but you really want to go to Brooklyn and hear Gabriel because that's the hot one. And I thought, what a bunch of shit is this, It's called spiritual materialism. So while I think it's useful to know who you're talking to, I call them the guides only because my ex from years ago, when he found out I could do this, because I had been keeping my mouth shut, used to say, ask the guides this, ask the guides that. And I was the captive medium for, as long as that relationship lasted. And they don't mind being called the guides. And I don't love trumpeting the names because anybody can say they're channeling anybody, I suppose. But finally, it's got to be the quality of the teaching. And, I feel, with my experience of this, they're not teaching fear. They're not teaching division. They're not teaching current events in a way that makes people happy because they want sexy information about current events. They're kind of beyond that. And they're here with a kind of specific agenda. And that agenda has been laid out now in 10 books. They're about a third of the way through the 11th. And they just started that weekend before last. They dictated about 100 pages in front of students in workshops in the last week and a half. So I'm just trying to keep up with it. That's my job. My job is less to interpret. The only time I interpret is when I'm asked to, in a situation like this or in a class of somebody saying, well, what did they mean when they said? And sometimes they'll re-explain it, or sometimes because I'm used to many of the questions, I can step in and do my best to answer. So that's my experience of it all. I trust the energy. I trust the information, although I'm often challenged by it. I trust that they know what they're talking about. And, when I used to battle with this stuff, and I did, I was a reluctant channel, and it was I wasn't looking to get a career doing this. I did this in my apartment in New York for 18 years with a very small group of people while I was teaching college, and wasn't expecting or looking to be known for this. And only when the books started coming that I sort of had to claim it, because my name is on the cover, even though I don't write the darn things. I had to sort of, get used to this and get used to my participation in this. But really my job, and I think any real channel's job, is a stenographer. It's stenography. You're taking dictation. We had to add, because I saw the transcript from a session Saturday or Sunday when I was working in North Carolina. And there was a sentence that had a parenthetical clause in the middle, and then an M dash and a whole other thought with examples. And then they came back to the original thought. And the transcriptionist wrote, "How do we punctuate this?" And I read the sentence, and clearly I had dropped an "it," because they were referring to the original clause. So it was, imagine I'm going to make something up. This is a hamburger, and a hamburger is made of meat, and some are good and some are bad. And it is not always tasty. They went right back to the "it." And I said, I think I overstepped in "it." That's probably the only addition in a text, would be something that was in a verbal dictation, spoken too quickly, or I was trying to catch up with a thought, so that's it. Other than that, it's just it. It's out.
Or it doesn't make sense grammatically. Do you sometimes have to correct that?
It's usually, initially I was transcribing the recordings, and because I'm not a great transcriptionist, I put periods. The word has a lot of short sentences because I didn't know how to use an M dash.
Yeah, it does.
And if you look at the later books, they're much more elegantly punctuated because the woman who proofreads knows how to use a parenthetical clause and an M dash, but we don't change things and we don't change the grammar. The book, The Resurrection, actually, when it came, and I think what you have, I hope what you have is past this. There was a new copy editor from the publisher on the book who did go through and change things. And when we found that out, we had to go through the whole manuscript again and change it all back to how the guide said it, because I would rather have it be an authentic transcription than something that's been modified. When people tell me, "Oh, I have an editor working on my channelings," I think, well, it's not yours to edit.
Yeah.
Not yours. Your creative work is. Inspired work is wonderful, but I make a distinction between inspired work and channeled work. Channeled work, you're the radio for, and inspired work, you're interpreting, you're using your own ability to craft. All of those things. My guides use my vocabulary, they use my memory, but occasionally they use language that I don't know. And that's really hard because I have to say it. There's, in the book that came, I think it's Alchemy, actually.
I don't think I have that one.
Well, they used a word that I was channeling at Esalen in front of students, and they were using a word that I didn't know. And I thought, oh my God, this might not be even a word. And I didn't want to say it because I know I can't go back and take it out of the book. And and they say it's in the book. We're saying a word, Paul's refusing to repeat it. In the manuscript, in the transcript, and at the end of the channeling, I said, what was the word? Penumbra was the word. Penumbra. What is penumbra?
Never heard of it.
I didn't know what it was. It's the light that shines from behind a cloud, which I didn't know, and it was the perfect metaphor for the entire chapter. So it appears as a footnote. But they're a little better than I am. So
that's amazing because my understanding is that at least that's our experience, right? Is that it's tapping into the vocabulary of the channel. So if it's not in your vocabulary, how does that work?
I might have known that it was something, but I would have no context. But once in a while I've met people that say, well, tell me what this means in Latin. Or can I have this in Aramaic, please? And I'm like, and my favorite was somebody who said, tell me what I thought about what I read on page 174 of the book I read last night by somebody that wasn't thinking, why would I? This is ridiculous. But, people can have that if they want. I think they're smarter than I am. And I know they are. And when I had a question this, I'd say, I don't care how articulate I might be, I don't think I'm capable of closing my eyes and dictating now 10 books that don't require any editing. And that's what happened, and there's a visual record. Initially there were recordings and everything was recorded and transcribed. Now I think the last 6 books or 7 books were all shot on video. And we have a visual record of all of them, as they're being dictated. And it's challenging. I mean, any video that's up of me channeling on YouTube is probably going to have somebody saying, I wish he would channel the right way, or I wish he wouldn't repeat everything. And, I'm sorry, it's not about that level of comfort. I had somebody who wrote me, I'm certain it was a very well-intentioned email after like the 2nd book. And they said, you please have to tell your guides to stop using the word Christ. It turns a lot of us off. And I thought, well, it's a channel book. I don't get to do that. But they define Christ, and outside of any religious context, they say that Christ is the aspect of the Creator that seeks to be realized in manifest form. It's really simple. It's the seed of the divine in all, and that's what it is. And it's also a level of consciousness that they're aligning us to through their work. So I think it's easy to dumb things down, and it's not necessary. And, I just have to trust that they know what they're talking about.
Well, I think people have triggers, because, we do spiritual work too. And, and we teach, and, Christ is definitely a trigger word, right? But, it's not religious. The Christ is really exactly as your guides say, right? It's a consciousness of pure divine love is what it is. Mm-hmm. So, in the context of that, that's just a trigger that they have. And I would say, because I know when you first picked up, which book was it? I don't know if it's The Kingdom. I remember when I brought this, we ordered this and got it in, and I gave it to Anthony, and his whole body started shaking. When you first...
It was that good.
It's that good. All right. I'll trust you.
Do you remember that? You kind of like dropped the book. You were shaking. So I think, I don't know. I mean, I love what you said. I mean, I love your New York sense of humor because we're both New Yorkers as well. So we get it, and it's a vibration that your books hold. And so I think an answer to, well, if that's a trigger word for you, right, it actually carries a vibration and a frequency that the guides are asking you to hold for whatever reason, and you have to trust it.
They use a lot of different words to mean the same thing, and they have unpacked it. They use the word monad primarily in the most recent books, which surprised me when it began. But they use monad, Christ, self, which is divine self or eternal self, interchangeably. And they basically say it doesn't matter what you want to call it. That's it. I just know that for me, it's not my job, if I were to be in integrity with this work, to give people what I think they want. Right. And I think that that's a trap in this kind of work, to tell people what they want to hear. My job is to take dictation. I have to trust that the source of the dictation is wise and loving. And I do at this point, because I have no reason to believe that that's not the case. But I don't think that their job is, at least it hasn't been for me, to placate my idea of my sense of self, which I would enjoy enormously. Oh, Paul, you're the most talented ever. Oh, Paul, we love working for you. It's like, what is this stuff? I don't get that. I get taken care of through this relationship, and I do feel accepted and loved and challenged by all of it. But I'm not sitting at home hearing what I want to hear because it's going to make me feel better. I'm hearing what I might need to support my own growth, or to make choices that are not, informed by fear, which is one of the things they teach.
Well, I did notice in several of your books, actually, including the latest one, Resurrection, where the guides will say, Paul needs to get out of the way, or we'll literally stop the dictation, right? Or if you're tired, or if you're not ready, or there's something that gets in the way of the purity of it, it seems like they want to stop.
No, they don't. They've never stopped, actually, because of that. Once they stopped, and this was, I think, in the 2nd book, and it was the only time a chapter was ever restarted. It was a gorgeous beginning of a chapter, but I was living in a Manhattan apartment, and the mailman kept buzzing my buzzer, which was really loud. I kept sort of operating and trying to keep the dictation up. And finally, I just started cursing. I'm sure there's a recording of me screaming at the top of my lungs for that guy to shut up. And the guide said, "We will do this tomorrow." That was the only time. For the most part, they'll say things like, "Paul, please take a walk around the block while we continue to talk," you know, which, and it's impossible. In the first book, they send me to the outhouse with a magazine. You know, "Paul, go take a magazine and go to the shed outside." I was in a Manhattan apartment. There was no shed outside. But, you know, there are many, many, many times I would love to stop the dictation when I feel it's not fluid or there's resistance in the room, you know, and I don't. And the interesting thing is, once I see the transcripts, it all makes sense in its own weird way. But my experience of the dictation can vary. When I interrupt is when I am confused by something they say or challenged by it. And most of the time they will take it. When sometimes they'll say, "Paul is interrupting, we're not going to take his question now."
Yeah.
And that's actually my favorite, because it means they have their agenda and they're going to plow through. And it's going to get answered eventually. And I've been told by people that the questions that I ask are useful to them, and maybe I'm serving as a proxy for the reader. But they've never, the only time they told me about not working with me, and it was once, and this is before the books, I was a very heavy smoker up until I was 48. And they said to me, "We want to continue working with you, but unless you address this issue, we're not going to be able to." And it's when I quit smoking, and I quit like the next day, actually, and I was like a 4-pack a day guy. So that was a shocking change.
Wow.
Nobody thought I would do it.
Amazing. Go guides.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I went to the doctor, you know, I got a little inhaler, I did other things, but I had the energy work happening simultaneously. But that is when they started lecturing through me. That's when the lectures started. I was hearing, but I wasn't. Most of my groups prior to then were really about working with the energy and being in the energy in a very direct experiential way. The teachings came then. That was when I was 48. I think "I'm the Word" was dictated within a year of that. Because then I hadn't been, once they started lecturing, I didn't want to record. I didn't want a record of it because I don't like hearing myself channel. And I kept thinking, if they say something wrong, I'm never going to want to do this again. I know myself. So another medium found out that I wasn't recording and was horrified. And the next week I recorded the session, and then I stayed up and I typed it. And it was a 7-page lecture, 7 pages essay that required no editing at all. It was beautiful, it was perfect. And I had been a writer with the worst writer's block of anybody I've ever known. So 5 pages without any editing was perfect. I thought, I want to do this all the time and see what happens. And then next week it happened again and again and again. And once I became willing to do this, they said, you know, we have a book to write. And if you take 2 weeks, we'll do it. And the first book was dictated over the course of about, you know, it's 2.5 weeks. I took 2 days off to go teach at NYU, but that was it.
That's so short. It's unheard of, really, when you think about it.
And there's no revision. So it was easy. Once it was typed, it was sent to the editor. And, you know, once it was typed up, I put it in my suitcase because I was channeling at the Esalen Institute. It was before a bunch of academics and scientists. It's my first time really channeling out in the world in a public way. I was terrified, but I brought the manuscript with me because somebody said, bring the manuscript. And I did my little thing. And the editor from Penguin happened to be in that session and took the manuscript home in the plane, and it was on the shelf within months. It was never even submitted. I mean, it's just, this work has got its own life and trajectory. I haven't hustled anything. I just show up. That's my job with this.
Wow. So the first book, that was "I Am the Word." And
I'm the Word, yeah.
That was
second book took a month.
Yeah, but all of yours are the same.
Yeah, and that was 500 pages in a month.
Yeah, I know. That was, but now, like, your books are now through St. Martin's Press, right?
Yep. For the first 9 were from Penguin, and the first 6 were from Penguin. Then the editor who had been at Penguin moved to St. Martin's and took me with him.
Oh, that's great. You had a question?
Yeah, I have a ton of questions. You get the one. First of all, what kind of person were you before all this happened?
I'm the same man that I was. I mean, if you really want to go back, I mean, when I was 25, I was about a year out of Yale. I'd been a playwright. I was getting produced. I was in Interview magazine. I had platinum blonde hair and a black leather jacket, and I was a drunk and becoming a drug addict very rapidly. So
Wow.
that's who I was. And I was an atheist. That's how I was raised. And I was working on an opera in the Midwest, and I was in some hotel room, and I didn't know where to get drugs in St. Paul. And I was crashing, and I didn't know couldn't have named my problem, but it's sort of one of those classic stories, that Gideons leave these books in the drawer in hotel rooms. And I took it out. It said prayer for people in crisis. And I said, well, I'm in a crisis. I didn't know what it was. I just knew I was in big trouble, and I was right. And I knew it wasn't getting better, and it wasn't. And I said it. I said the prayer, whatever, I don't remember what it was, and I meant it. And then I forgot about it. And about 3 days later, I was back in New York, and I woke up and I said, what can I do for myself today that's positive? And I heard a voice telling me what to do. And I stopped drinking that day, and stopped taking drugs. And that was the beginning of an opening. And my whole life fell apart, by the way. That was it looked like I had everything going for me until then. That's when everything fell apart.
Yeah.
And there was a real displacement for me, who I thought I was, how I thought the world was supposed to work. I mean, it was rough going.
Your identity fell away. Your perceived identity.
I've still got a personality. I'm a curmudgeon, I'm cranky and, all those things. But I mean, it was a real rocking of my world. But I began to open up spiritually at that time, and I started seeing lights around people. Didn't know what the hell was going on. And it was also, I mean, if I were to place myself in time, I was 25 years old in New York City. I'm a gay man. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic. Everybody that I knew was dying all around me.
Wow.
I was out of school for the first time. I'd never made a living in my life outside of working in a bar. I mean, everything that I knew was on fire.
Crumbling.
My world was on, yeah, it really was. So that was the environment that this happened in. And I am very grateful for all of it. I hope to God I never go through anything like that again. I mean, I've been as poor as anybody I've ever met. I remember having a spiritual experience in New York after a very rough time. I was maybe 29, 30 years old or something. I think I had 35 cents to my name, but I was walking around New York knowing, and I mean really knowing, that I was right where I was supposed to be, and so was everybody else. It was astonishing, and it lasted for like 3 days. And when it went away, I was so hurt, because I thought, oh my God, this is it. I think I got a little preview. I got an intervention of sorts. I got to see what the guides now talk about.
As the upper room.
It was the upper room, yeah, although I wouldn't have known it. I think I had to go back and do the work to get there. And I don't say that I'm there. I don't claim that I'm ascended, and I'm not a master. And I tend to be very wary of people who announce themselves as those things, because I think we're all in process. This is a process. And I think, I'm not farther along than other people. I have a skill set that's been developed. Somebody can touch their tongue to their nose. If I was 6'6", I'd be playing ball. I'm not. This is how I'm wired for whatever reasons. And so how I'm used in this way.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with the guide's teachings, right? That we all have this Christed self, or the monad. I mean, I love that, because it's actually brought up a lot in Resurrection. The monad, the Christed self, the higher self, the authentic self. I'm trying to remember the realized self. Oh, and the manifest self.
Have you ever asked, why me? Why?
Other people have asked it, and I've it's harder for me to channel about myself. I believe, well, there's two reasons. First of all, I agree that I believe that I agreed to it before I came, and that I do think is part of it. I know of one past life that I was given a name about, and I had to look, they said, go look it up, and that was pre-internet, and I found it in an encyclopedia, and I was, oh my, and it was somebody who was teaching during the Inquisition, and so there's that history, and I had a dream, and everybody from that guy's life was in the dream, or at least a couple of people one person that I could find out because he was famous and he got burned in the town square in Florence. It was a messy time to be doing esoteric work, was what I realized. But when I was studying healing with this teacher, this old Italian lady who, actually she was Irish, she married an Italian, when I was in my early 30s, I did a class with her, and she said, okay, everybody, I'm going to give you a little prayer, and it's very powerful, and write down what you want, and you're going to get it, but be careful how you write this down. And I said in retrospect, I should have asked for a boyfriend or like to own an apartment. I should have asked for something practical. I was like, I basically said, and I wrote it down, I never remember what the wording was, but I basically said, I want to go all the way with this.
Wow.
I want to go all the way with this because I knew it was real. And when I look back at it, I actually think that was, the books in some ways were, they were a way to do that. I was unhappy periodically in my life. I mean, I'm quite happy now, actually, but the time a few years ago where I wasn't, and I was working with an agape prayer minister who was quite wonderful. And she said, I'm going to ask your gods what's going on with you. She was Southern. I'm going to ask your gods what's going on with you. And they came through and they said, well, Paul's job is to hold the door for others. And she was like, well, that doesn't sound right to me. And I'm like, I'm really pissed off now, but I thought I was pissed off before. But at the end of the Book of Mastery, the guide said, the Book of Freedom, the guide said, at the very, very end of the book, and this was channeled at Esalen, they said, the door is open now and everybody gets to come. And they said, Paul, you get to come too. And my life is very, very, very different than it was since then, I have to say. And when I asked later, they didn't tell me this, but I figured it out, what the doorway is the books. And the guides say we're all doorways. Their teaching is you become the doorway to the upper room through your realization of the true self. You become, in some ways, the portal for all that you encounter. They say that's how a world is made new.
That is, it's funny because there's something in the book that I just loved. Let me see if I can pull it out. We are the portals, we are the conduits. It was so powerful that I wrote it down. I always keep such a messy thing that, I destroy books because I'm always writing so much down. But this is exactly, here it is in the book. It says, to be the doorway is to know the self as conduit. To open the doorways is to hold the tone of liberation. I am holding the tone of liberation. I'm holding the door and the keys to all doors in love. I just thought that was beautiful because, and I think on the page before it as well, about how that we are the portals.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's it. And not we at the level of personality. It's the aspect of the self that is in manifestation, the true self in vibration through, they say, presence and being, because that's what they're teaching these days. That's what does the work. So it's not like we think we have to do the heavy lifting, and I don't think it works at the level of personality. This isn't a teaching of the deification of personality. Personality has its role and it's necessary, but it's not who we truly are. So it's the self that emerges, in agreement to source, because they say God sees God in all things, that does this, because it can't not do that. The divine can't exclude, we exclude. We judge, we fear. The true self, they say, is the aspect of self that doesn't operate in fear, wasn't raised in fear, doesn't rely on fear to keep us safe. All those things that we do, I do still, but I'm much better than I used to be. And I don't want to say that and jinx it or something, but I get it. I get what they're saying. So, and that's what being the doorway is. I think it's holding that tone for everything that you encounter.
Well, I think also the one thing that's worth pointing out, and I think people who will be watching this will know your work, but they may not have read all your books. And I think there is, I don't want to say necessarily a chronological order that must be done, right? So it's not like you have to read all, whatever, 12 books by the end of the, third trilogy, but there is something where the guides will say, well, we brought you through, I am the word, and then the mastery and the truth and the kingdom. And there's different language that they use to bring you to, what's the language they use? Bring you to the vibration that you are able to hold in this human form, something like that.
They say that a lot. This is about what you're able to hold.
Yeah.
This isn't about escaping reality. It's not about what people call spiritual bypassing. It's not about painting things pink and calling them pretty or holy. It's not about that. The guides say everything is holy. We're the ones denying it. So what you're releasing is the denial of the divine. Now, every book comes with an attunement, or every book is a vibrational transmission that works with the reader. And I do believe that they escalate. And I do believe that people benefit when they work with the sequence. But in all of the books, the guides catch people up at the level, again, that they can hold. They've often said we teach in a one-room schoolhouse. And so that means that everybody's going to be met at the level that they can learn. And, it's kind of like I got a C in geometry, maybe. I think I probably got a D in algebra. You know what I mean? I couldn't go there. I didn't want to go there. I stank at it. I could have cared less. So I'm not going to be doing physics, on the blackboard. I'm not going to do that. But there are other things that I can hold. And I think, interestingly enough, Resurrection, because when I read it, I was surprised by it. And I often don't read the books until I have to do the audiobook. It's the first time I really read through the whole thing. And I thought, wow, this is kind of really accessible in a lot of ways. And it's not a bad entry point for people learning the work.
I agree.
And if people want to go back to the others, they can, and they often will. People enter where they enter. But I do think that the guides are working with us, again, at the level that we can hold. So if I go to, a physical therapist, he's probably not going to try to stretch me out more than my muscles can manage it. He'll limber me up, or she'll move the shoulder so that the shoulder is not doing what it always did as it progresses towards, more and more motion. And so that's, I think, how they're working with us as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, your Anthony is, a martial artist or whatever. So, using the analogy of muscle memory, right? The more practice you do, whether it's the gym or martial arts, that muscle learns, and it goes further along and it's able to handle more.
Paul, I have a question too. You speak about vibration. What is a vibration?
It's a tone. Everything. The guides talk about sound. They say everything is in tone. Everything is music, really. They say we live in an octave, and this is our reality is an octave with its own notes, high and low, and everything in form is in vibration or in tone at one level or another, high and low. So if you think of a scale, we've got the heavy, dark stuff, and we've got the higher stuff, but it's still all operating in the same way. And the guides say what they're doing with us is really transposing the music of who we are to play in the higher octave. The higher octave they call the upper room. But my understanding is it's sound and vibration, or the oscillation of God. So what they've said is there is one note sung in the entire universe that is in manifestation as all things. And they call that the word, or, the one note sung, which they'll call God or source or whatever you want to call it. It's not somebody sitting on a cloud. And they say everything we see is an expression of that at one level of vibration or another. So the idea of lifting vibration is about restoration to source. That's really what it is. And they say the upper room, and this is just how I've heard it. They say the upper room, or Christ consciousness, is the highest level that we can hold while maintaining form. because even though they work with form and to lift form, while we still have a body, we're still moored to a reality that requires that, and that there are other levels of reality beyond that where form isn't even a requirement. As we know, form consciousness doesn't need form to express.
Yeah, that's so powerful, right? That as, you know, as we kind of progress in this so-called, whether you want to call it ascension or, you know, moving to the vibration of the upper room, we get lighter and lighter and lighter.
What if we want to stay in the lower room?
We can do that. I think we can do that up to a point.
Does that make us less divine?
No, because you can't be less divine. You can't be. You can have an experience of yourself through fear, through separation, and learn through all those things. I think that the soul comes with things that it wants to learn.
Yeah.
And I've had some rough lessons. So have everybody else that I know. We've all, you know, I don't think it's a cakewalk or is intended to be necessarily. I think that would be foolish.
So if everything is divine,
yeah,
and I understand where you're coming from, and everything's are these vibrations, undulations of frequencies and
that we're operating with
octaves and things of this nature. What if a soul comes into this vibration and decides, I'm going to stay really low in a vibration? I'm going to stay really low.
I'm going to go to the guides, because they're saying up to a point. You can choose what you wish. You can choose what you wish and have a hard experience in self-deceit and self-deceit. But that is a choice born in self-deceit. They're saying, but that is a choice born in self-deceit. It's a denial of your own divinity. It's a denial of your own divinity and your own authority as well, and your own authority as well, because you're acquiescing to fear, and making it a god and making it a god. It is a terrible god, but you can have it. It is a terrible god, but you can have it. Learn through that, and then hopefully choose another way again, and then hopefully choose another way again. Each of you comes with an ability to transcend an idea of self. How one does that is through experience, an opportunity which the soul will offer you, if you decide you don't want it. If you decide you don't want it, you may get a very hard nudge. It's not always graceful. But the soul will dictate circumstance. Far less so the personality. And they're saying period.
Well said. Right? You want pain and fear and you want to live in that vibration, go for it.
Well said, guides.
Yeah.
Well said, Paul.
Yeah. That was amazing.
Well, it's when I can't answer a question, they'll intervene, and they're usually much quicker than I would ever be.
They are fast. I have to admit, they're very fast.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, they've had, practice too with you over many, many years. How has your channeling changed from when you?
Enormously. Initially, when I first started hearing clairaudiently, it was for other people. I had studied this form of healing. I was volunteering at a center for people that were mostly living and dying from AIDS at that point, and cancer. It was, Manhattan Center for Living, which was around a long time ago. And I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I could hear them, so I could, if I had my hand on your chest, I heard the name Gertrude, I learned to say, who's Gertrude? And you might say my mother, my grandmother, my daughter, my dog, the woman who fired me last week. But as I got confirmation for that, and I began feeling what was going on in others' bodies at the same time, it was really trippy for me. I didn't understand it because I wasn't trained in this. But once I began to trust the information, I started a little group that met in my apartment thinking that I was going to do my old teacher's work. And that didn't happen. They started teaching instead. Yeah. But the lecturing didn't start for years later. So I was hearing initially for the first number of years, energetic attunements. That's what was coming through, ways they were working. The attunement to the word, which was the first attunement, came through when I was maybe 33 years old or so, and they're still doing that in workshops. And I turned 60 this year. So they've been doing this for some time. But yeah, it's fast now. And sometimes it's fast just because if I'm so busy trying to keep up with the dictation, I'm not going to interrupt it, and sometimes it's in a big, wonderful accent. And that's because I guess the guide has an accent. That's what I've been told, but I trust that voice. and he likes to hear himself talk. And when that one's going, he's just on the let it rip, because I'm not gonna be able to stop it anyway. And he takes great joy in the teachings that he brings forth. He's the one that likes to talk about music and being in song and all of those things. So, but I'm understanding of my role here, which is to be the person in the chair. It's not about Paul. It can't be. And I think if that were the case, it would be a big problem. And I think that there's a reason that I started doing this a long time ago, and I didn't get known for this work until I was, about pushing 50, because I don't know that I could have handled it earlier on. I had an ego like everybody else, and but I taught college and I learned a lot, and I loved doing that, and it was a good time for me. And I look back on my life and I go, wow, that was a very different life than you're living now. And I like the life I'm living now, but I think everything that preceded it was a prerequisite to it and part of the training, whether or not I would like to think so.
Yeah, I mean, the humility part is a big part of any, all the ancient sages and mages teachings is humility and surrender, right? Which is like letting go of that small self.
When did you decide that you could let go of your old way of life and do this full time now?
I was getting encouraged for a while to move on from that. But, it's rare for somebody who's 50 years old to walk away from a job that they've been in for 25 years. Mm-hmm. And I was teaching at NYU, and I was running a graduate program simultaneously at a small college in Vermont, where they were much more open to what I was doing with this stuff. But what happened was, finally, I remember I was doing workshops on weekends, and I was traveling back from LA on a red eye to make a 9 a.m. faculty meeting at NYU. And I actually was being paid next to nothing, and I went, why am I killing myself for this? And also, because my work was getting more visible, I was aware that, what I was being hired to do wasn't what I was doing in all my free time. And it's not that I felt that there was a conflict, there wasn't. But it was frightening to me, because I'm a creature of habit. If I like a restaurant, I'll eat it. I'll go there all the time. I won't go to the new place that opens up down the street. I like my small self's expectations.
That's you.
Yeah. I don't know. So that was it. But it was a big deal when I did. But I waited to make sure that I could pay for my own health insurance. Mm-hmm. I did those things. And I built a practice reading, which I was reading mostly because I was so fascinated that I could do it, because I didn't know that I could do it until I was doing it. Mm-hmm. I didn't try to do it. Suddenly somebody came to talk to the guides, and I went, okay. And then she said, oh my God, you started looking like my father. I realized it happened all the time. I was stepping in, and that became something that I could offer. But I don't miss that life. I liked I liked teaching. I was a good teacher. I feel that teaching for me was my spiritual practice for all those years. I learned how to love in that job, and loving somebody is about wanting to see the best for them, without having my own expectations met. So I learned a lot there, and I think it was all useful. So.
And I know you say that you're just the conduit now, but in a way, and that you don't call yourself a teacher, but really you are a teacher, because when you're teaching us right now, you're teaching everybody who's listening and watching, and you are a very good teacher. So I would, I know you're a very humble man, but I would, just like to say, wow, you're an amazing teacher. And I would own that.
Well, I know I do. I was a really good teacher when I taught, playwriting and whatever I taught back then, or running. It was a good administrator too. I learned through those things. But the guides are delivering through their teaching. And I'm a good teacher in interpreting their teaching or explaining it to people, but it's not my original thought. They'll let me go off on a tangent, and I'll say, was that okay? And they'll say, well, not really. And then they'll come in and they'll help. or they'll explain it to somebody in an easier way so that they can understand it, which is basically what they did with your question, because I would have gone off in a whole other direction, and they just said, oh, this is the way to answer this. So it'll be useful. So I don't discount my contribution. I'm very good at showing up for this stuff. And I'm challenged by showing up because I'm very shy socially and personally. And if I'm in a role, I'm okay. But I live in the rainforest, you know. I mean, I moved from New York to the rainforest. I'm still learning to drive. I'm 60. I never drove. I have my learner's permit now. My car that I never get written and get driven around in the garage unless I start to step up my game. So that's what you're talking about.
Do you think that the guides, and I don't think there are any coincidences here, that you were a playwright, you are a teacher of literature and of writing, and this all seems to, and you were teaching, didn't you say you were writing opera? You were writing...
Well, I was writing a libretti. I wasn't writing music. Yeah.
Okay. But doesn't this all seem to flow together?
It does. Well, I didn't know that it did. You know, I mean, like I said, I was a boozy kid. So, but when I used to write when I was young, in my, you know, late 20s and early 20s, late 20s, but mostly when I quit boozing, I stopped. Mostly I was just stuck, you know, and that was very hard for me.
Mm.
But my process was, I used to put on a piece of music that felt like what I was writing on a loop. And I would sit there with this one piece of music playing for hours, and I would just sit there. What I was doing was inducing trance.
Mm-hmm.
You see, but I didn't know it. And stepping into, if you asked me to step into your father, it wouldn't be a lot different than stepping into a character that I was writing. So I learned all of that.
Mm.
And I don't know why, but it's how it works for me. I don't know if that's true for others. So yeah, I think everything happened in support of this. And that's not to discount what I was doing and make it less than, because I think it had its own value, you know, with or without what followed.
And I do think the language that we use, right, and everything that led up to this, right, because the Melchizedek energy, interesting that, you know, in the work that we do, we connect to that. I don't know why. I don't understand it. We connect to this Melchizedek energy. We connect to the Yeshua energy, the Magdalene energy. We're not Jewish in this lifetime that we know of, although we have a very strong connection for some reason to ancient Judaic text. I lived on a kibbutz. I did pro bono work for, you know, the Israel conference, you know, why, right? So I think that there is some kind of, even if we don't understand it, maybe it's from past lives where we're all like regrouping together. We're finding each other again and doing the work, assisting each other to get this work out. I don't know. We talked to John Burgess about this too, right? Yeah, we talked to John about this, where it just feels like we're kind of all finding each other again.
I think truth is truth, you know, but I live on Maui now, and I, you know, knew who Ram Dass was, but I didn't know him when he was living. And through a lot of real wacko serendipitous things, I'm now, you know, my friends are all in that satsang. You know, I'm very grateful. I live down the road, and that's where I spend time. And I think something set me up, and I'm actually learning a little bit, you know, about Hinduism, which I didn't know. And the teachings that the guides bring forth, according to these folks, are complete in alignment with that tradition, which I didn't know. Somebody said, oh, this is sort of Christian flavored Hinduism. I went, oh, maybe so. But I'm happy for it all, you know, because finally I think truth is truth.
Truth is truth.
And that's it. It can show up in any system. You know, you have to just move past some of the dross, the accumulated crap that these things collect over time. But I think at the essence of them all is probably great truth and great beauty.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of what the guides are teaching would show up in the Vedas, but in modern language.
Exactly, which I don't know because I haven't read the Vedas, but that's me. You know, I don't read anybody's stuff, and now I'm embarrassed. I buy the books and they're sitting on the bookshelf. And many of them have been there for many, many, many years unopened. So that's sort of my excuse is I'm trying to keep it clean. You know, I try to stay out of pop culture. I don't watch other people's channel if I can help it. You know, I don't want to read it.
Yeah.
Compare what I do to others. And if somebody comes up to me and says, oh, your guides are saying the same thing as so-and-so, I'm usually happily relieved, because that just confirms the teaching.
And Gnostic, that's the other thing. It's very Gnostic, the inner gnosis.
Yeah, and other people say it's Hermetic because they're talking about form. But, you know, I've had the Hermetic on my bookshelf for a long time, and I haven't read that yet either. And I'd like to, because I would benefit from all this. Victoria Nelson, who was on the phone for the first few teachings, who was the active listener, used to say it was a Gnostic teaching. No, she said it was a Hermetic teaching, and Jeffrey Kripal, who's the head of the religious studies department at Rice, or now he might be the dean there, said it was Gnostic. He was convinced, and they used to debate because they're both scholars, and I'm just happy I'm just happy when it comes out coherently. After every lecture, I say to the students, did it make sense? Could you track it? Did you follow? And they say yes. And I go, thank God. Because I'm just busy up. What?
I think it's both Gnostic and Hermetic. As above, so below, the form.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
could well be. You know more than I would. So truthfully.
Yeah. It's definitely got it all. I mean, we really, really both connect to it.
How is you live in? Did you say you live in Maui now?
I do, yeah.
How do you enjoy being in Maui different than New York? Is it changed?
I love it.
Channeling at all?
Changed everything. Yeah, it was the best thing, and I didn't plan it. You know, I was living in New York City. I went to Costa Rica to run a retreat for a week in 2020, and New York City went on lockdown while I was away, and I couldn't go home. And a friend who was here found me a little tiny house to stay in, and sent me a plane itinerary, because I really didn't know where to go. I couldn't go home. So my dog was in New York. I was moving apartments in New York the next week. I didn't go back for 2.5 years. The dog got sent to me. You know, I got moved into the new apartment. I never spent a night there. You know, my assistant lived there happily for a while, you know, and I was happy to give it to him. But yeah, I never went back. It changed everything for me.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I do think when we're closer to nature, that something happens. There's kind of a connection, and it brings us close. I don't know what it is, but it helps us calm the mind and calm the spirit. You know, there's something there.
I feel like I was brought here. You know, my friends at the satsang say, "Oh, it's you know, Maharaji brought you here." And I was once getting body work, and I saw a giant monkey staring down at me. And I said to the practitioner, I said, "Who? There's a giant monkey staring down." And he said, "Well, I was chanting to Hanuman right before your session, so maybe, you know, Hanuman's on my desk right now." So, you know.
That's funny. That's funny. Well, I want to talk a little bit about intention, and I also want to make sure we do have time just to read this one thing from the book. But the guides you work with speak a lot about intention, and I'm curious if you can explain this, because it seems like it unlocks, or, you know, when you shook in a positive way. I want to be clear that when Anthony shook, when he held the kingdom, it was a positive experience, that it activates some kind of higher vibration. So in the first book, right, I am the word through my intention. So this was something that the guides had the readers say. I am word through my intention to open my third eye clearly to see that which is before me in the higher realms of consciousness. And now in the latest book, Resurrection, throughout the book, it's I have come, I have come, I have come, and God is, God is, God is. Can you explain to people what's kind of happening in that process?
Well, they're both attunements, or they're both claims of truth. The guides say an attunement is a claim of truth. So in I think it's Realization is the book that guides bring the reader to the upper room and introduce the upper room. And in the upper room, there's a claim when you go, I'm in the upper room, and most people can feel the energetic shift when they invoke it. It's the claim, I have come, I have come, I have come. And again, that's the true self announcing itself as present. And the guides say that claim, I have come, is actually an alchemical claim that is offering your entire being to the divine self to receive it. So it's kind of like lava flow, like whatever's standing in the way is going to get addressed as part of this. That's I have come. The claim God is, God is, God is refuting the denial of the divine, which they say is our only real problem.
Oh.
We deny the divine in ourselves and in what we see and in the world, in manifestation. So the claim God is not about, oh yeah, I got to remember that, that's important, or I'm going to make God where I don't like the person, I'm going to just make God be there.
Mm-hmm.
You're claiming what is already true in the high octave, which is the presence of the divine where it has been refuted. And so that's quite potent when you work with it and when you feel it. You know, the guides were doing it with this large group of people last week, and you feel the room shift when you do it. You can feel how the claims interact with matter, which is probably why you were shaking. You know, it's not uncommon. You know, the books operate as they say, the real teaching is the vibration that informs the book. That's the real book. The words give context. But the real book is the energetic transmission. And when we're aligning to that, they're aligning with the reader in support of their ability to receive. That's how I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, it's powerful. Go ahead.
By profession, I'm a speech and language pathologist.
Uh-huh.
I understand frequency and vibrations and amplitudes and all of these things pretty well. And but you have a tendency to repeat three times.
Yeah.
And I know you're not a stutterer. There's no fluency problem
No,
here.
this is the Trinity. Oh, you're going to go there. Okay. Oh, sorry.
This is my question.
Sorry.
This is my in here. Give me a.
Go ahead.
Why three? Why three times?
My understanding is body, mind, spirit. Once, you know, that's really it.
Body, mind, spirit. Okay.
Once for form. Yeah, that's my understanding. Accurate. They just said accurate. I just double checked. Accurate.
It's accurate.
And that's what they said, yes, that they're speaking to the different aspects of self, or they're being announced through the different aspects of self. I hear that that's accurate. Am I asking? Am I saying this right? Because nobody's asked that for a long time, and I didn't want to be supposing. I had a friend who was an old-time medium who used to say everything spiritual needs to be read for 3 times, once for the body, once for the mind, once for the spirit. I don't know if that's true. But everything in triplets has been the case since they began. You know, that's just how they brought this through, and I've learned. And they'll often close by saying period, period, period.
Yeah, they do. It's funny.
Yeah. So, you know.
But that happens with us in our work. We get the same triple thing that we can't quite understand, but it comes through. Yeah. So, okay. So I want to read this piece back to, because it does actually bring up this upper room, which I can't remember the first book. You said it was Realization.
Well, that's where the upper room, I think, was sort of was taught. The end of the Book of Freedom, they bring us to the upper room without sort of naming it.
Okay.
They bring us, if I'm correct.
I just can't remember what, because I haven't read all your books, but I've read a lot of them. I've probably read 8, and I can't remember which one it was. But when I first read it, I started laughing when I first read the upper room. So again, here it is in Resurrection, the upper room. But the piece that I wanted to read was, this was timelessness. Well, let me talk about the upper room first, then we'll talk about timelessness, because the upper room, I assume they use that as a way to teach us because we love our linear examples. But this part I think is important. And I'd love for you just to kind of explain what they mean by this. I mean, I think I get it. I think I understand it. You can get to the upper room in vibration and you can go there. But there's a point where they say you're still hanging out in the lobby, right? Yeah. Because you can be there, but you may not yet be in accordance with or aligned to it. So what's a practical example of that?
Well, if I'm understanding it, the upper room is another octave. You know, and so just because you're in the octave doesn't mean you've ascended to the peak of it, to the highest note, but it means that you've entered. And what they're teaching now seems to be about how to maintain that level of tone and resonance. I mean, they're teaching a lot recently about memory and how memory actually ties us to the lower vibration, because the identity that we've been formed in was entrained in fear. So, you know, even though we don't intend to, we're still going back to the old. And when they talk about this, they're not saying it's not that something didn't happen, it's that what happened isn't who you are. and it's a new way of perceiving self beyond old prescriptions, whether they be personal or cultural or familial or religious, so that all things can be made new, which is their teaching. Yeah. So that's what I understand this is about. And they talk about the upper room as another octave. So when they talk about the foyer, I think it's so that people don't go, well, I'm there and that's all there is to it, because growth doesn't stop. This isn't about, hi, I've ascended, thank you very much, see you later. I don't think the lessons stop. I think the experiences may change. How we're taught, I understand, changes. We're no longer reliant on fear as a teacher because we've stopped agreeing to it. And by agreeing, I mean energetically agreeing to it, not that we don't have the choice to go back to fear, because we do. If I go back to fear, I'm going to have my experience at that level. That's all.
Yeah. And then I think there's the collective consciousness piece to it as well, that individually we can, right, plug into that. But the less that we're doing that as a collective consciousness, that's kind of shifting the all, right?
And absolutely. They say for every one that awakens to their true nature, you awaken 1,000 more by the nature of being. It's not about proselytizing. I don't expect everybody to read these books, but the ones that align at that level of awareness are lifting what they encounter. That's what I understand. Behold, the teaching is, behold, I make all things new. They say the one who knows who he is, who she is invoking this by nature of presence and being.
God, that's beautiful, actually. That's really beautiful. Okay, so this is about time, because we were just talking about time, and this is from the new book, Resurrection. Now, imagine that time itself, altered in this way, was not present in this field. How old would you be here? What time of day would it be? Would the body even be what it was without a clock to measure age? To understand timelessness is to move to an agreement of the plausibility that time may be a construct. First a construct, and then a construct that has been agreed upon by the collective to create experience known in linear form. Your experience of time is linear, but in fact, you are not linear. I just thought that was, let's cut to the chase. And, the other thing too that I like, it's so natural now for people in this new age spirituality to throw quantum into the mix, right? Without really understanding it. And you're kind of talking about it without proclaiming it. Oh, and then here too, it also says the upper room is where this begins to transform.
Yeah, I haven't read quantum stuff, I just don't read stuff. And I'm actually kind of happy that I do. I mean, the guides, still call my computer or television half the time, so that's where they're coming from. But yeah, I mean, they've been talking, the eternal self expresses beyond time. It's not bound by time. God is not bound by time. It's, that's what it is. So this level of awareness, when you move beyond the collective prescription of how things are supposed to be, other things become possible. And, time is useful. And somebody said, because they were working on memory last weekend, it might have been yesterday, which was the last day of the workshop in North Carolina. And they said, well, what happens if but it means I don't need to remember things anymore. And they said, no, well, you remember that you brushed your teeth this morning. And if you didn't, you might be brushing your teeth all day long. So it's good that you remember that you brush your teeth. I mean, it's really simple. It has its place. It has its use. I don't expect to be sort of wandering timelessly. I don't expect that, but I think the aspect of self that we are aligning to in this work comprehends things beyond linearity and how time operates and the dictates that time brings. I think that's I do believe that it's a collective agreement and that it's a useful one at this level, but it's not the only way to be an experience. I don't think my dog knows what day it is, but she knows what time she gets fed. So she's got an honoring of time, but I don't think she knows when it's her birthday, except I, make a fuss over her,
I love that. I think it's important though to bring, I love the way you brought it up. And especially now it sounds like the next teaching is about, there's some aspects of time or memory that plugs into fear that we can just let go of.
That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah. Do you have any final questions?
No, I just think it's wonderful having you here. I've never met you before in person. I think it's just fascinating hearing your journey and how it continues and how the channel comes through you and how you write. And it's just fascinating. And you're a wonderful person.
Oh, that's kind of you. Thank you so much.
Do you have any parting words for people who are going through this journey?
I would just want to say trust the process, but I'll ask the guides was there anything more going through this journey and that you wanted to add to that before I interrupted?
Oh, before the guides might have something to add. Well, I think when we feel stuck, because we all feel that way, even if we're all committed, right? We're inspired to be spiritually awakened, we're committed, and we feel stuck.
The idea of being stuck is the problem. You don't see the view. You don't see the view beyond your stuck feet, beyond your stuck feet. You believe that you're supposed to be somewhere other than you are. Everything is opportunity. Everything is opportunity. It must be seen as such and must be seen as such. Even the idea of stuck, which is just an idea, which is indeed just an idea of stuck, provides the opportunity to unstick, provides the opportunity to unstick. If you understand that you are the one in charge, if you understand that you are the one in charge and claiming this experience and claiming this experience as an experience that you will learn through, that you will learn through. Everything must be an opportunity. Everything must be seen as opportunity, or nothing can be, period. And they're saying period.
Everything's an opportunity to learn. We're here to experience again. Yeah, that's beautiful. Wow. Well, thank you for this. It's just, on the subsequent pages, we'll definitely be putting links to, where people can find out about your workshops. And of course, go for the latest book and any of the others. Really, I would say, having read, again, not all of them, I've read a lot of them. I think any book you picked up would resonate on some level and just open and unlock things. Yeah. But if you can do them all in order, that would be better, everyone. All right. Well, thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you both. It was nice spending time with you. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.